Okay, Ali, actually, Negar, I want to go to you. You were shaking your head on that analysis of Saudi's bloody war in Yemen.
Well, I think it's very similar to the line that's coming from Tehran on their involvement in the Syria war at the request of the legitimate government in Syria, and then blaming the other side for all the atrocities and basically what can be seen as war crimes. So what Iran is doing in Syria is very similar to what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen. There's no excuse for the toll on civilians, for killing children on a school bus, and for using Western supplied. I think that's what makes it a very important discussion here in Washington. These are Lockheed Martin supplied bombs that the Saudi coalition has used on school buses, killing children in Yemen, and it wasn't just this last instance, as reported by CNN, not me. So I think the type of criticism that both sides, Riyadh and Tehran, are throwing at each other are very similar. Both sides are at fault, and also in the proxy wars in the region, both sides have hands on them. Both sides are basically trying to exert their influence in the region, trying to use or excel their power, while basically destroying or diminishing the region with a lot of civilian tolls in the process.
Ali, in terms of the relationship in the region, but also with the US, there's been a shift back to a closeness between Riyadh and Washington after the Obama years, where the Obama's administration reaching out to Iran through the Iran nuclear deal. What's behind all that?
And the Saudis always want a good friend and maybe even a servant in Washington who will do their, they do their regional agenda. And that's what happened in the past. Even with Obama, they got some of it. The U.S. went to war in the region many times in behalf of the Saudis, and to protect the Saudis. And this is very disturbing, the fact that the United States, which was built on removing a monarchy, an absolute monarchy, is supporting the monarchy and absolute monarchy in the Gulf. Monarchies. And in terms of the Yemen, today, Mohammed bin Salman has surpassed Bashar al-Assad in killing children. The UN has been silenced.
Well, it's not a competition, is it?
It's almost a competition. The #1 killer today, numbers, I'm not saying the UN, because the UN stopped publishing these numbers. The #1 killer of children in the world is Mohammed bin Salman, and that must be taken. That's not reform. It's important. When you talk about the municipal elections, you must also acknowledge that it was boycotted by the people. Only 5% to 7% of eligible voters participated in the election, where women and members, it's half elected, powerless council. It's fake. That's what I'm saying about it. We have to be equally honest. Yes, these happen, but these are powerless council, have zero power. So it doesn't mean anything. In North Korea, they have an elected parliament.
Okay, Karen, a lot to unpack there. But can I also ask this question to throw a bit more at you? The relationship with the US, because the Trump administration seemed very, very close to MBS. First foreign trip was in Saudi Arabia. Even though the oil dependency of the US has moved away as to become energy independent. And also, there's this seeming closeness with Israel as well that isn't always seen on the surface, at least in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, so I think U.S. interests in the Gulf are, as they have been for many years, which is to protect commerce and the waterways, and not because the U.S. is importing oil from the region so much anymore, but most of Asia does. And certainly any crisis in either in the Bab el-Mandeb or in the Persian Gulf would be a great, great crisis for the global economy. So that is still the U.S. interest there. While it's true that Saudi Arabia and the United States under Obama had kind of a more difficult relationship, and there was certainly a lot of offense taken with the Goldberg interview with Obama among the Gulf leadership. What's shifted, I think, is a lot of the things that the U.S. was asking for many years, the burden sharing, that the Gulf states themselves would take on more responsibility for providing their own security. And that's what's happened. And many could see the Saudi intervention in Yemen starting in 2015 as exactly that. And if you see it from a Saudi perspective, and Ali, I'm not defending one side or the other, this is purely as an analytical perspective, the Saudis face something different than what the Iranians do in Syria. The Saudis receive missiles falling on their capital.
After the war or before the war?
Within the war, after 2015, 2016, and the last year. And this is for them an absolute threat to their territorial sovereignty. This rationalizes their need to continue the aerial campaign in Yemen, which has, as you say, rightly been a disaster. But the threat perception is very real and very different. And so they have taken a more interventionist view of the region after 2011, as has the United Arab Emirates. And they see themselves as having the green light from Washington to do this.
Very well, but let's go back to Faisal in Jeddah. Obviously, Iran nuclear deal is now in jeopardy because Washington pulled out. It's no secret that Jeddah was pushing for that, along with Israel as well. But this does create a potential problem for those that believed in the Iran nuclear deal, that proliferation could return to the Middle East. Let's listen to MBS talking about whether the Saudis would ever go nuclear.
Saudi Arabia does not want to acquire any nuclear bomb. But without a doubt, if Iran developed a nuclear bomb, we will follow suit as soon as possible.
That worried quite a few people when that was played out on the 60 Minutes show. Faisal, can you explain that position?
It's simple. A nuclear Iran will ignite a nuclear race in the region. Not only Saudi Arabia, Egypt will follow suit, other countries will follow suit, and nobody wants a region with so many problems have nukes. It's very important. Iran do not have nuclear weapons or any other countries in the region. Because if Iran started, it will ignite a race. Also, I wanted to comment. There is, you cannot compare what Iran did in Syria, 600,000+ dead, and what Saudi Arabia did in Yemen. Okay, most estimate the civilians' casualty around 10,000, which is very sad. And from the Saudi government always stating the civilian cost is not acceptable. Saudi Arabia did not go all in bombing places in Yemen targeting civilians. That's why the war dragging on now for 3 years. If Saudi Arabia want to use its air superiority,
okay,
they can bombard Sana'a and Sa'ida and different cities controlled by the Houthi. But we refuse to do that because at the end of the day we will rebuild Yemen. Yemen is very crucial to our security.
Thank you very much. Ali, can you just quickly pick up on the Iran nuclear deal and where you see MBS's foreign policy in the region vis-a-vis Iran going?
The Saudis have always been fearful of their neighbors. If it's Egypt during Nasser or Mohammed Morsi. I wrote an article about it in 2013 about the Saudi model. Saudi Arabia's policy is that no country in the region should rise, even if it's Qatar. The reason that they have this issue with Qatar because Qatar is successful. They did the same thing with the UAE. They don't want to see successful neighbors, Iraq, anywhere. So they will undermine the growth or stability of these countries because they want to be number one. Instead of building themselves up, they are bringing other people down. The same story in Yemen. They can use all the excuses. There is multiple excuses for Yemen, for Bahrain, for invasion.
Okay.
Under international law, this is an invasion. It's not an intervention. This is what the West has put, and it's an invasion just like the Russian invasion of Poland, the Russian invasion of Czechoslovakia. It is an invasion, just the Russian invasion of Afghanistan.
There's a UN Security Council resolution
that
justifies
that was because the US and Obama endorsed it. That's why I'm saying it's not only Trump. Obama okayed the invasion of Bahrain and the invasion of Yemen, and that's. Obama gave the Saudis more than what he doesn't want to admit.
What it means is that the international community is now responsible for what happens in Yemen, and so we all share the guilt for these atrocities, and especially the United States if we have been supplying the weapons.
And the 10,000 number this is 3 years old. The UN refused because of its corruption to update the number because it will be a huge number due to starvation and bombing and cholera, the largest.
I really don't know where you get your information from.
Okay, I don't want to get into. I don't want to get into a body count and different things because obviously the facts on the ground still have to be determined, and no one has exactly clear figures. I want to talk about terrorism and fundamentalism, because Mohammed bin Salman has really sort of pushed that he wants a more modern, outward-looking kingdom. Let's take a listen, and Karen, I want to get your reaction off the bat.
70% of Saudi people are younger than 30 years old, and honestly, we will not waste another 30 years of our life before dealing with extremist ideas. We will not spend the next 30 years of our lives dealing with destructive ideas. We will destroy them today and immediately.
Is that happening?
I think we certainly have seen actions by the state to curtail religious extremism inside of Saudi Arabia. At the same time, we've seen actions by the state to curtail all sorts of dissent inside of Saudi Arabia. So there's a wide brush of who can be labeled a terrorist by Saudi law. And this is very disconcerting for those of us who are in favor of the women's activists, for example, or even more moderate clerics who were just trying to have, some debate. So Mohammed bin Salman's justification is, we kind of have to clear house, and while we go through this process of reform, we need everyone on the same page and in a sense, supporting the state. And caught up in that have been members of the ruling family, certainly members of the religious establishment, many activists of all kinds, men and women, but particularly targeting women activists. So this is a casualty of this reform effort. For people on the street, it's true that if you talk to young Saudis, they feel very happy that there are more people going out and walking together, maybe even holding hands, going to a cafe and mixed gender. This didn't happen 3 years ago, and now it does. So quality of life certainly has improved, and many young people are happy about that. But the lines of what's acceptable and what's not in terms of criticizing the state are very, very firm.
Negar, what's the region in Iran, especially thinking about an MBS potentially having control of Saudi Arabia for decades to come? And are some of the reforms in Saudi being picked up in Tehran as well?
Well, I think, again, I want to emphasize that reforms are good ideas, they're good news, and if they're actually genuine, and we have to wait and see, it shouldn't just be promises. We have to see how these promises turn into actual sustainable and long-term action. But again, I want to emphasize the starting point for Saudi Arabia compared to not just Iran, many other countries in the region, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey. The status of women, the social, the political, even the cultural and art freedoms in these countries, and the level of activity within the society. You talk about Saudi women getting the right to go see movies. We have female directors in Iran. We've had women making movies for years. And the comparison, I think, that's being done with Saudi and these other countries is just very unfair. And I think it's influenced by who is a political ally of the U.S. or the West in that region and who isn't. If you're not a political ally, the issue of human rights, the status of women, activism, everything is just going to be seen from a much darker and skewed, I would say, viewpoint, as opposed to if you're a political ally, if you do big arms purchases from the U.S., or if you're within the energy security community of the West, then it's seen completely different. And I think that's what frustrates not just Iranians, but other populations in the region as well. And
I know we're all going to be watching MBS for a long time to come, because a very young man indeed. Thank you to our guests from Jeddah and here in Washington, D.C. That's all we have time for. That's it for another edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King. Thanks for joining us.